Juan Jingru. Gautam Guruswamy. He Ying Ting.
Here.
Saloni Jane. Joe Jin Joe. J-I-N. Subham Dratodi. Rajath Joshi. Jitan Raj Kadam. Akhil Karaturi. K. Ling Yun. P. Ling Yun. Ankur Kathari. Naga Ramakrishna. Li Bohua. Here. Ben Quan. Q-U-A-N. Sean. Bang Sean. Sean?
Yes.
Lim Tao Jun. Lu Kongyu. Lu Weiling. Lu Yuan. I think you might have gotten the highest grade. Pat yourself on the back. Yeah, give it. Anuja Mahajan. Ronald Maniar. Chitale Mahore. Barath Bayana. Elo Mehta. Swapnil Mundra. Sarath Najendra. Siali Naval. Damrata Nirli. Juana Patel. Hey Jahal. Vishal Parekh. Saurabh Honekar. Chu Tenyu. Best I can do, Tenyu. Fun smile. Vishnu Ravindran. Ren Chingpei. Q-I-N-G. Sneha Sarkar. Honey Shaw. Vivesh Shaw. Himak Sharma. Shashank Singh. Sneha Shankar. Mikhail Shetty. Shreya Shivana. Devin Upreti. Wang Cheng. Wenbo. Wu Kun. Wu Ji. Yu Jialin. Zing Yu Zhuan. What's your name? That you? Drew Dayton. Dayton. Get it. Sung Hao.
Yep.
Sung Kimchi. Kimchi. Jessica. Zhang Jiacheng. Joe Li Kun. So, Wei Ju. Is there anybody here who thinks they should have gotten one and didn't? You two guys, right after class, will go to my office, and it may be that I mispronounced your names, it may be that they haven't been graded yet, it may be that we don't have them. So, you know, sometimes they get put on the wrong folder, so come to my office right after class. You can both do that, and we'll make sure that either you get it or we find out what happened to it. I can't fail to notice that almost every single person who's come to me and said, I'm having trouble with this class, isn't here to get their project. Seems like there's a correlation there somewhere. Anyway, you know, there were a lot of good grades. I was pleased with the performance by and large. If you look at the grade sheet, you know, the grades are pretty much the way they are for the midterm, the letter grades, but, you know, don't worry about the letter grade now. The thing to, you know, what happens is I just use the numerical grades until we get to the very end. And then I have the list of all the numerical grades, and I assign letter grades based on that. So, but you know, there were quite a few who did quite well. A lot of you did quite well, and you know, a lot of you did just perfectly okay. And there's a few that had some significant problems. I have a handout here that relates to the Project 3, and let's talk about it just a little bit. Does anybody that didn't get the handout come down and pick one up now? I think I put in the college server. Project 3, Spring 18. Help. Yeah, steps to show code and pop up. So, first of all, there's several ways to do this. You don't have to do a code pop-up to demonstrate the requirement. In Project 3, Requirement 2, it asked you, you have to demonstrate that you're able to send code back and forth between your client and the mock repository. You don't have to have a full-up repository, you know, but you have a server of some kind. You have to show that you send code back and forth. And an easy way to do that is to pop up code that exists on the server. And so that's what I'm illustrating. I added in the requirements for Project 2, I made some changes. I didn't give you any new stuff to do. I tried to clarify the wording a little bit so it was really clear what you had to do. And what I said there was one way to demonstrate the requirement is to pop up code in a client window that came from the server. And so that's what I'm going to talk about here. COM provides send files and save files folders on each end, and the intent is that if you have a message that says file, it'll send that file across from the send folder to the receive folder. So that means if you want to send a file from the repository storage somewhere using that mechanism as it exists, you have to copy it from the storage into that send files folder and create a message that has a file attribute that triggers it to send that file in a series of messages. And you'll need a server proc that does that, and you need a client proc. What happens is, let's suppose that you do respond to a double click in that window that I showed you last time. You know, there's a directories and then files. For each directory, it shows the files. If you double click on a file, you'll have a mouse double click event. And in that event, all you do is form up a message that says, send me that file. You're not popping up anything there. You're sending a message that says, send me that file. What happens is the repository then, in its server proc, has an action to create a reply message and copy that's telling them to copy the file down to that send file folder, and he sends the message. And on the other end, it should get, in several chunks, get sent, and then a file be posted, a message to the client saying, so that receive thread doesn't put the message in the receive queue until the file is finished and closed. That's the way it's supposed to work. Somebody this morning told me that he's getting a message for each chunk, okay, in the queue. If that's true, that's an error, and I'll fix it. Won't prevent you from sending files. It'll just be, you'll see some annoying chatter that you don't really want to see. That's all. But in any case, and now what you need is, on the client side, you need a proc. When that message comes, you need a proc that pops up a window with that code in it, and that's what I'm talking about here. So add window to GUI named, I called it code pop-up window, and add a file list mouse double click event handler that builds a send file message included. So the command is send file, and it's got a path and a file name, okay? And so, you design the message so that all that information goes. It's, again, you have to design the message, and you post it to the server. Now, in the server, you have a server proc send file that extracts the name of the file and the relative path from the request message, builds a reply message that has file attribute with the file name value and path attribute, copy the specified file to the send file folder, post to the client, and the file attribute causes COM to send the file from that send file folder. Okay. Hello, Google. I don't need your notification. I really don't. Don't need your notification. Oh, wasn't Google. It was, I was blaming the wrong guy. It was Mozilla. So, and your client proc, so you add the client proc send file that extracts the file name from the message, reads your text file out, perhaps as one long string. There's, most of the files are going to be relatively small. You can do that, not a problem. And then calls show file with the file name and the file contents. This is the string name and the string contents. Up comes the window. So in the window, you have a label that says this is the file name. Maybe, maybe not. If you do your job with correctly decorating all the files, the name will be there, at the top of the file. So, okay, guys. Yes, thank you. So, is that the only way? No. So, it may offend you to do that double copy. Copy the file down to the send file folder, and then copy it over in blocks in the message. So you could write a new function for COM that send file from a specified path, and so you don't copy it in the send file. It just sends it from the, and you can base it on my send file. Only now, instead of coming from the send file, you use the specified path, and that would work just fine. There's another, and also, you could provide in the COM a pair of functions that set the send and receive folders to whatever path you want. That would work too. Finally, there were a couple of people in the class who wanted to send them as file attributes, and you can, but remember that our native C++ messages, the attributes are new line separated. Now, if I try to put file text in one of those attributes, it's going to have a whole bunch of new lines for every line of the text, and boy, are you going to confuse the message handler, okay? It'll think every one of those is a defective message. You go, blam, 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 you know, bad message, bad message. You know, I know because I did that. Okay, I forgot. Now, can you do it that way? Sure. What that means is that you have to take your source code file and convert it to hex or base 64. Then it won't be triggering those new lines. You know, it won't be interpreted as new lines, just as some hex character. And so converting to hex is fairly easy. Converting to base 64, I have, if you look in CSE 687 code, there's a base 64 folder that provides some code that does it, that I stole from somebody else. And I think I gave them attributes, you know, I didn't really design it myself. So, but I think the easiest way is to just, this path of least resistance, I think, is to do this. Is that the only way to demonstrate that requirement? No. You know, you could, for example, show that one of the directories in a repository had a set of files, but it didn't have the file that you were going to send. Then you send it, show it's there, okay, something like that. You know, so, bunch of ways to do that. The other diagram shows you a little bit about how you might do that. For the show file, if I have added a new window called code pop-up window, you know, so it's just in my GUI project, I just say add a new item, and you pick WPF window, and you name it code pop-up window. Then it'll give you a window, and you can, you know, it has its own XAML, it has its own code behind, and you can do whatever you want to there. And so now in my show file, this assumes that I've done it, that I have the file name and the string text in it. In this moment, I'm not using the file name, but you know, this this has a flow document. Okay, this window has a flow document, and the flow document understands paragraphs. That's what it understands. Okay, think of it as a clone of WordPad, and WordPad likes to use paragraphs. That's what the flow document does. So you say paragraph, equal new paragraph, inlines.add new run file contents. This is kind of weird syntax, but that's the way they wrote it. That's what they expect. So you do that, and sure enough, you know, up it comes with the code in it, and you got to say, you say code pop-up equals new code pop-up window, pop-up.show, and there it is with the code. Here, I cleared the previous contents, and then I added this paragraph right here, code, pop-up code view.blocks.add. I'm adding the paragraph, and it's that statement that shows the code. And you might choose to do this show afterward. I couldn't tell the difference, you know, visually, but you might see a flash or something. So you might do the show. I think it would be better policy to do the show after all that. In the XAML, you know, you need, if you want a scrollable window, you need a flow document and then a scroller around it. I'm going to show you an example of that this morning. Now, I'm not going to post this code, you know. If I feel like it in a couple of weeks, I might, but, you know, I'm not going to post it now. You know, if I do, you're going to do almost nothing on Project 3, okay? I got to leave you something to do. So, anywho, that's that. And these are in Faculty Fawcett handout, CSE 687 code, Project 3 helps Spring 18. Same old, same old, same old. Okay. Okay. With that, let's talk about WPF. So the agenda this morning is we're going to go through some of the basic WPF stuff. I think on Thursday we'll come back and do some of the C++ CLI fairly quickly. Again, because I don't think you really need to modify it, but in case you wanted to modify the translator, that presentation would help you. And then we're going to talk about components for the rest of the time on Thursday. So today, we're going to look at some of these controls. This is the presentation, and we didn't look at every single page of the presentation, but we looked at the most important ones, and you can go back and look at the rest of the pages when you're ready. Again, remember, there's a really good tutorial site for WPF at that link. Now, we're going to look at if you go to handouts, core technologies. Oh, the pop-up went away. So you go to handouts, core technologies, Windows programming code, WPF_basic demos. You'll find what I'm going to show you. Let me pull it up and let's go. While that's loading, let me go over here. So this is, now I'm on the college server, and this will show you exactly what you'll see on the college server. You go to Core Technologies, go to Windows Programming, go to Code, and you scroll down, and you'll see a whole bunch of WPF examples, and this basic demos pulls together most of those. It just creates a solution. There's no code in this at all. It just creates a solution that takes most of these as projects. Not every single one, but most of them. That's what we're going to do now. So, handouts, core technologies, Windows programming, code, and then I'll scroll down to the WPF. So let's pull this up. Oh, I have two of them. Pull up one. Okay, and I think I've already built this. So I want to start by, what we're going to do is go through the panels first, because you can't really get to first base until you have a basic understanding of the panels. Once you understand the panels, then the rest of the stuff kind of falls into place. I'm not going to talk about all the panels. I'm going to talk about a couple of them. So let's talk about the Canvas panel first, and let's just run it. So what I have here is, they're all buttons, and they're all absolutely positioned. So everything in a canvas is positioned relative to one of the corners. So it might be top left, top right, bottom left, bottom right. And you'll notice that they're Z-ordered. They have a Z index. And so if button 1 Z index is greater than button 4, if they occupy some of the same territory, the button 1 will obscure button 4 because its Z index is larger. They're painted from low Z index to high Z index in that order. So anything with a higher Z index paints over the lower one. That's all done before it's ever presented to you. It's done in the refresh buffer before you see it. And if you look at it, you'll notice I have a little event handler. Look at the status bar at the bottom. So button 1 clicked, button 3 clicked, button 4 clicked, button 2 clicked. But notice how I come up here, so now I am on top of both of them. When I click it, I still get button one click, as I should. So it's giving me the top Z index, the event handler for the top Z index, which is exactly what it should do. So, cool. And the other thing I want you to notice is that my status bar is binding to this gray area is binding to the width of that diagram. I'm not changing the width of this message area, but I am changing the width of the total status bar, and you can tell that because I've shaded it gray. So let's look at the XAML. So, oops, wrong XAML. Let's look at the XAML for the canvas. So, first of all, you see these window resources, style, blah, 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 blah. This is a way of setting styles that I can apply by name, window style, demo style. So if I only have one, I probably wouldn't do this. I would just apply it as I go to the markup. But if I have a whole bunch, instead of having this big, huge, long element again and again and again, I just get all this stuff with one name. I get these from the name window style, and I get these names from demo style. And notice they have different target types. This has a text block type, this has a button type. So this will only apply to buttons, this will only apply to text blocks, but I could say object here, and that style will apply to anything I applied it to, whether it made sense or not. Because some of those, an object in general, a UI object might not have all those, might not have a background property. If it's a line, it doesn't have a background property. As far as I know, it doesn't. So here's my canvas, and notice that I have button style equals static resource demo style, static resource demo style, static resource demo style. So I'm getting a whole bunch of attributes with that one statement. And notice that I've sized them, width and height, and I say canvas.top 50, canvas.left 50, so it says 50 pixels from the top, 50 pixels from the left. And my canvas Z index is 1, and button 2 is, canvas bottom, canvas right, and I have button click events, and I have mouse leave and mouse leave events, and so that's what, if you notice when I run it, so I click on this button, and now it stays there until I leave the button. That's what that mouse leave is about, okay? Nothing happens when I enter, because there isn't an enter event, but if I click it, it stays there as long as I'm inside, it stays there, but as soon as I leave the button, that leave button just clears that status bar. Yeah, that's what's going on. So that's the canvas. And I can draw lines, you can draw pictures and all that kind of stuff there. I'm just putting buttons, but button is just a drawing. It's a drawing with an object behind it, but I can draw lines and polygons, and those are objects too. A line is an object. I'll come back to that point again in a few minutes. Okay, so that's a canvas panel. The next one, the most important one, that's the simplest. The most important one is the grid. And so here with this grid, I have 2 rows, and in the first row, I didn't size this button, so it just it grows to fill the entire grid cell. And I sized all of these, and they by default are aligned in a particular position. I didn't position them, but I aligned them. I didn't align them, but the default alignment is horizontal center, vertical center. There is a vertical alignment property and a horizontal alignment property. And the default is to have them centered. And so, the buttons are all there. And I don't think I have any code to respond to clicks or anything. So, but you can kind of tell it is being recognized. So let's just take a look at that grid definition. So here's my grid definition. So I have 2 rows defined, and in grid row 0, I have content button is 4 with no sizing, and so it filled all of row 0. But all the buttons in row 1, grid row 1, they're all sized. Okay, they have a height and a width. And I could have used a vertical alignment left, vertical alignment right, I'm sorry, vertical alignment top, vertical alignment bottom, horizontal alignment left and right to change their positions. Okay, so that's the grid panel. Grid panels are really, really useful. I want to look at the stack panel for a minute. So stack panels, here's a stack panel. So stack panels allow me to place things, to stack them horizontally and to stack them vertically. But so let's see. The stack panel doesn't do a great job of sizing the way you want. So button 4, let's look at the XAML and see what we got. So I have, notice that I have, so I don't have an outer grid. Almost always you'll have an outer grid panel and stuff are put inside the grid. In this demo, this just shows you that it doesn't have to, you can have a canvas grid or a stack panel if you want. But in this stack panel, I have a stack panel stacking vertically that takes 2 things. It takes a button, and then below it, it has another stack panel, and then it takes a button. So it has 3 things. It has a button, stack panel, button, and the middle is a stack panel that's oriented horizontal, okay, and so I have a button and a button. And the first button is sized, and the top button is sized, and the bottom button is not sized. But if you look at the way it looks, notice that that bottom button doesn't, in my bottom button is button 4. Let's look at button 4. Let's see what I did with button 4. Button 4, I have no sizing on button 4 at all, and so it gave me, just a default. It didn't fill the rest of the panel. Okay, stack panel doesn't do a whole lot of control for the sizing, and it can be frustrating sometimes. Stack panel is a good way of, displaying something vertically or horizontally, but it's not like a grid where you can control exactly how it, what its expanse is going to be. Grids are used very frequently because it's really easy to get things fitted the way you want. If you don't size it, it goes to fill the cell. If you size it, it shows the size. Stack panels, it can be a little frustrating using stack panels. I've used them, but I tend to use grids instead of stack panels. I'm not going to take the time, if we have time later on, I'll come back to it, but right now I'm not going to take the time to talk about the dock panel. And the wrap panel I almost never use, so I won't talk about that. Let's talk about some of the other elements here. If we have time, I want to talk about routed events and possibly attached properties. Let me tell you, just talk about the attached properties for a minute. In graphical frameworks before WPF, like WinForms, for example, all the controls had a whole bunch of events and properties. And they were there whether you used them or not. An event in .NET is a delegate. So a button, if it has 7 events in the WinForm thing, it'll have 7 delegates attached to it. And a list box has 5 events. It has 5 delegates associated, whether you use them or not. You know, and it has a whole bunch of properties, maybe 20 properties and 30 properties, and they're all there. Whether you use them or not, they're there. WPF said, that's insane. Let's not do that. So what they do is there are primary events that are, you know, a button has a button click event as a primary event. It will have a delegate for button click. But for other events, like width changed or something, it doesn't have an event. But you can attach it. What attaching means is there's a registry that says, for this control, this particular instance of that control has this property width. And so you can get whatever you want, but only what you want. You don't have all this other stuff, all this other baggage, this traveling around with you just because, you know, they wanted. Sometime you might possibly use that property, so we got to give it to you. They don't do that. They attach it. So most properties and most events are attached. Not all of them, but most of them are. And so great savings, you know. It's taking a little bit longer to process because it's got to do the dictionary lookup to find that. But it's a hash table, so it's quick. But a whole lot smaller and simpler. And by the way, it's a human being that's clicking that button or stretching that thing so slow that that little performance hit is totally immaterial. You know, a human being, I think our threshold of perception is something like 10 milliseconds or maybe even 100 milliseconds. Okay, something like that. You know, pretty to this processor, that's an eon. Okay, so it takes 50 more microseconds. Who cares? We'd never perceive it. Okay. So so we'll talk about controls. Probably the next thing I'll do. We'll talk about data templates because you may need that for Project 4. We'll talk about some of these others just a little bit. So let's go and look at controls. Now this is doing some things sort of related to what you might choose to do in Project 3 and what you'll need to do in Project 4. So what I have here is a primary window, and this is a flow document. I have a grid splitter between flow documents, so here's change text. So what I change it to, what's on the left is a quote by Einstein. Not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. And this is a soliloquy in Moby Dick. Ishmael was the first mate, if I remember right, and he was the harpooner on Moby Dick was a story about a whaling ship, and you know, the captain was obsessed with this white whale that he had a run in, and it had injured him, and you know, he was obsessed with killing this white whale, and in fact, the white whale sunk his ship eventually. Okay, but anyway, the first mate was, it's a classic. So this summer, if you're bored, go to the library and get Moby Dick and read it. Really, it's an adventure story and well worth reading. But anyway, so you know, I can change the text back and forth, and you know, that's the you can see it. The flow document means things flow around, and that's what's happening here. It's sort of like a browser flow. It doesn't have to flow. There's properties you can stop it from flowing if you want to. And a code window you'd probably not want it to flow. And I can pop up a new form. So there it is, bingo. So it's like this, you know, like our code pop-up window. I'm not showing code here. I have an image and I have a control binding, and this is just an illustrating a binding. This is a slider and a progress bar, and all I did was I bound the, they each have a value property which measures how far the slider is and how far the progress bar is. And I just did a binding of the value of the progress bar to the value of the slider. And so just to show you, it's just an illustration of simple binding. And the control group is a little wrapper that doesn't mean much except that if I put radio buttons in this inside this control group, the default behavior is if one is on and I click another one, it turns that one off and turns on the one I clicked. So it's like a toggle. Okay, so that's the default behavior. And so the control, instead of you writing a whole bunch of eventing to make that happen, that just happens automatically. I know it does with radio buttons. It might with checkboxes. I don't remember whether it does with checkboxes or not. I'm going to come back to checkboxes in a few. So that's the control. Let's take a little bit of a look at both the XAML and the, so I want to look at the Window 1 XAML. This is the first window. And you see here, I've got some rows, a banner row and a button row, and flow document. This last row is the flow document row. And what you see here is the flow document. Notice that the flow document is embedded inside a flow document scroller, and that's what gave me the scroll bar. That's what gave me the scroll bar. And notice that it went away if there wasn't enough text to fill it. So what happens here is if you look at this flow scroll viewer, is toolbar visible as false? That just means it goes away if the text doesn't exceed the size of the window. You don't need to scroll, the scroll bar goes away. And text wrapping equals wrap. So if I say no wrap, it won't wrap it. It'll truncate it. And that's what you would do on your code viewer. And I think it may by default be no wrap, because I don't remember setting that in my code viewer, you know, when I did the pop-up. So, there's a grid splitter, and you know, and so you know, that just gives you that flow document stuff. Okay. And code behind, notice that, so I have a button one click. That's the one that changes the text around. And so here I have a paragraph defined in the text. And so if the count is greater than 0, then write the write this, and else put this, call me Ishmael, soliloquy stuff in a scroll viewer. Okay. And button 2 click, what does it do? It says window to win equals new window, win title, win show. That's why that second window popped up. Okay. And for a code view, you do something like that, like we talked about at the beginning of class. Okay. So that's just a basic illustration of the way controls work. Now I want to look at data templates. In a minute. So here we have a window with a list box that has columns. List box doesn't have columns. When you install a list box in a project, each one of these is a text block, one text block. We're going to change that. If this was WPF, and you said you pulled up a, if this was WinForms and you pulled up a list box, and you said, I want to change it, the framework would say, the heck you say, tough luck, suck it up, what you get is what I gave you, period. Can you change it? Yeah. So complicated that no mortal has ever succeeded, I think, except the Microsoft the guy who designed it, okay? So, but in WPF, piece of cake. You want to change it, you change it. Anything you can change. The good news is you can change anything. The bad news is you can change anything. So, but it's really easy. Let's see how easy it is. So here's my XAML, and now here's the list box. And now I said, oh, by the way, I want to set up a list box item template. I want to change your items. I don't want your items to be a text block. I want it to be what I say. And what I say is, inside this data template, I put a border around everything, and inside the border I have a grid that has a single row and multiple columns. And I didn't really have to tell it a single row. If I don't define one, I'll get a single row. Then I say text block grid 0 and grid 1, grid 2, grid 4. I have a little tiny spacer in there is why there's a difference here. Now I'm binding the text, course number, course name, semester, and I'll show you where that comes from in a minute. Okay. So I just told it I want to change your item, and here's how I want it changed. So now let's look at the code behind. So here's the code. So sure enough, I have a class course that has public properties. These are encapsulated properties. There's a private backing store. Course number, course name, semester, instructor. And now in list items add new course, course number, course name, and it's smart enough to bind them into the right element. That always worries me a little bit. So it's doing all this stuff on your behalf, okay? But if it isn't doing quite what you want, oh, it might be a little work to figure out. But anyway, really easy to change. And I have an item selected, so when I run it, you selected item 0, you selected item 4. That's modal. I hate modal parts. So now, why might this be interesting to you? Well, when we have to set relationships, imagine that you have a pop-up window. It's kind of like my navigation window, might be that navigation window, the browse window. A way to identify a parent. And now what I want here is two things. I want a checkbox in my file view. I want a checkbox and the file name. And so if I want that file to be a child, check. Whichever files I want to be checked. And I can, and when I hit that check, by the way, that will persist, but when I hit that check, I can browse to a different directory, see those files, check, different directory, check, different directory, check. Okay. Really nice way to do it. But in order to make that effective, you want for each row, checkbox, name. Okay. Great way to, right? So, you might choose to do it some different way, and that's fine. But understand that easy to make it, to modify it to whatever you need. Really, really easy. Control template. I don't like rectangular buttons. I can make them elliptical. That's all the properties of a button. Click me button, style button. I don't like them. So lower button I left it rectangular, but I gave it a gradient. The upper button I made an ellipse. You want to do that? And there's a way to do it for every button in your whole window. Okay. Piece of cake. So, if we look at this, the control template, the XAML. So here, I say style button, foreground, font size, gradient, gradient stops, and style, triggers, blah, 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 window resources, stack panel, button. Now, here comes a button template. This is a control template, and now I just say I want it to be an ellipse. I don't want it to be a rectangle. All I had to do to make that button an ellipse. Piece of cake. And so, and custom element. Let's user control. So here, if I run it, I can start it, stop it, start it, reset it, reset it. Okay. There's a timer and 3 button. So this top one is my user control. This is my user control, and I gave it a border, and I gave it 2 buttons, and I have a timer, and I gave it a text block to display that value. So a user control, that user control is a standard term that at least Microsoft frameworks, what they mean is that I can build a control as a composition of a whole bunch of existing controls. And WPF treats it the same way, uses that name that same way. But I can make my own. So for example, I could make a custom element. And there it is. But is it? Absolutely useless. Okay, but it shows you this is an element, and now I can replicate it. I can have that silly thing, blah, 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 in 15 places if I want. So if I had some fairly complicated thing that I wanted to, I don't want just a composition of already existing controls. I want to build my own control. It's a piece of cake. The code to do this is no bigger than any of the other examples I've done. It's really simple. Okay, what else do I, let's look at bar chart for a minute. So with bar chart, what I'm doing is illustrating that these really are objects. So I go onto here, and the tooltip tells me this is rectangular 1, rectangle 2, rectangle 3, rectangle 4, rectangle 5. Okay, those are objects. So I could, if this were, stock market data, I could click on one and it would give me a whole bunch of, I could give me a whole bunch of, history or whatever I wanted to see. It's, the things that can be queried. So you can associate a whole bunch of interesting computation and properties with any of those. That's the object model behind this rendering. That's what SVG and HTML5 Canvas doesn't have. It doesn't have an object model. When you draw with HTML5 on the canvas, it's just lines. You can't query them because they're just lines. You could build an object model behind it, but that's probably 6 months' work or more. Not do that, please. To do with all my stuff. Where's all my stuff? Come on. Back my stuff. Let me see everything, would you please? I don't know what I did to solution. I never seen that happen before. I don't know what I did to it. So there's one of these properties. Thank you. Good for you. Thank you. So embedded code. So here, got the app. I don't. So here, I've got code of this thing. When I run it, it draws some stuff, and but it's all doing it. It's totally, there is no code behind file. The code is here in the XAML. So in a WPF application, we normally have a XAML file that does layout and a code behind that responds to events. But if I want to just have one file, I can have a XAML file with embedded code, or I can have just a code file that does all the things a XAML would do. You can't embed the XAML, as far as I know, you can't embed in the XAML. Well, but so, this is XML. Remember, the XAML is just a variation of XML. It is an XML language. And so I can have a C data section. You remember when we talked about XML, we talked a little bit about C data sections. It just says, don't interpret these things. If you see a angle bracket in here, don't interpret it as markup until you see the end of the C data section. So you can just embed code if you want. Would you ever really want to do that? Probably not. Okay, but I thought it was interesting. If you want a really compact application, you just have a little tiny bit of code, you might choose to do that. One less file. Instead of having 2 files to keep track of, you got 1. Okay, now I want to look at routed events. Let's run it. So here I have this whole thing as a button. Look at the top title bar. Now, here I am on the button. Now I'm on the image. Now I'm on the text. There is a button that holds a dock panel. Remember that graphical elements can have a content, and most of the elements, everything except the panels, can only hold one thing. But the panels can hold multiple things. So if I want a button to hold multiple things, I got to have the button hold the panel, and the panel holds multiple things. So I'm using a dock panel, and I'm docking the image to the top and docking the text to the bottom. Okay. But what happens here is I've got events. So when I mouse over this text, I get that event. That mouse over gives me, I'm writing that label. I'm writing label element on the title bar. When I mouse out, it goes to button. When I mouse into the image, it tells me it's an image. When I mouse into the button, it tells me a button. But when I click on the button, I get the same event handler no matter where I click. And the reason is that if you look at this, the image and the label and the button all have mouse enter events and mouse leave events, but only the button has a button click, as a click event. And so what happens is when I click on the image, the framework looks for an event handler in the image and doesn't find one, looks for an event handler in the dock panel and doesn't find one, looks for an event handler on the button and finds it in response to the event. Okay? So those events bubble up the tree until they get to a handler that can handle the event, or they get to the top of the tree and it doesn't get handled. That's routed events. So, it was just laid out with, button has a button click, and then mouse enter, mouse leave. Image just has it's docked to the panel, and then it has a mouse enter and mouse leave, and the label has a mouse enter and mouse leave, but no, they don't have any button clicks, so that's the way that works. Okay. Attached properties. So I've got some notes about the grid. And data binding is used to change the height of a button to expand with its grid row height. So here, button grid row 0 height, binding path equal actual height, element name is container. Now I don't really need that because that happens automatically in the grid, but I could put it in some other on a, or I could say it's equal to half that, or something like that. And the dock panel, so button doesn't have a dock property. Button doesn't have a dock property. So button has a click property, but it doesn't have a dock property. But it can use, this is an attached property. It just uses the dock panel.dock, and now what that does is the XAML subscribes this guy for the dock panel property in that registry. Okay, the XAML does a whole lot for you. If we didn't have the XAML, there would be a lot of code to get that, a lot of weird code to get that attached property registered. But all that happens really nicely. So these are all attached properties. Okay, I think I am going to stop here. Let's see if we what we got here. Looked at data templates, user control, control template, custom element, drawing bar chart, drawing with code, embedded code. I didn't show drawing with code, but canvas we looked at, dock panel, grid, stack panel, top panel. So all of these are here if you want to look at them and play with them, and I think you should. So these are all in handouts, core technologies, Windows programming, code, and then all the WF ones, all demos all start with WF underscore. And the solution that we were just looking at was this WPF basic demos, which doesn't have any code itself. It just adds the projects for many of these. There's some that aren't in that. There's a dispatcher demo. Let's take a minute and look at this dispatcher demo. We've already done that. Is everybody comfortable with the dispatcher? We've done that a bunch of times. I've said, if you're running on a child thread, you got to do this dispatcher and you're using a delegate. Is anybody that needs to see that? Let's look at message hook. That's the last thing I'm going to do here. Let's look at message hook. One second. Let me run it, and then we'll talk about it just for a little bit. So, I click on mouse move. As I move it, I am capturing messages that are flowing in the underlying Windows message loop. If I click off mouse move, it won't respond to those mouse anymore. It shouldn't. Well, clear. Come on. I clicked it, you off. So it's not responding. But as soon as I do something like, oops, I've forgotten exactly which would you please? Okay, so now button up and down, left and right button down, I'm responding to. So all this is doing is showing that if you really want to get to the underlying native Windows message loop, you can get to it. Why would you want to do that? Only because the framework doesn't support something you want to do. The framework doesn't support hits outside the client area except for very specific things that, so I can grab the title bar and I can move it, but if I want to click on the title bar and get an event, you clicked on the title bar, the framework will not do that for me. No way to do it. But I can go down and I can trap that message in the Windows message loop. I got to look it up to see what message it is. But I can trap that message in a message loop, and I can do an event handler for it. So let's take a quick look at the code, and then I'll answer that one question. So source add hook, new each Windows source handle messages. So now I have here's my list box. Message name lookup. This is a little function that just allows me to interpret. The messages are numbers, and I need to interpret what those numbers mean. And then this source initialized plus equals new event handler on source initialized and subscribe for rendering event, composition target rendering equals new event, track render event on source initialized, source presentation, blah, 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 blah. Hey, so here's the handle messages, hook to handle Win32 messages. So I do a message name lookup for the message, and you know, here's where I'm reacting to those, and you know, and then in the Windows loaded, here's where I am registering that. What's really happening is my handle messages is a filter that's put into the message loop. So when I register that hook, what it's really doing is every time it pulls a message out, it invokes my hook with a message, invokes my hook with a message, invokes my hook with a message. And my hook just tells it what I want to do with the message. Question, did I hear a question? Yes.
Regards to sending message.
So this is, you're in the Project 3 help demo?
The sheet which you gave us, I actually have a question on that.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So the question is, the file attribute is basically when we actually create the message, the reply message.
You have to give it, the file attribute tells both the send thread and the receive thread that this is a file. So you can't use FILE as an attribute anywhere else, or you'll confuse the system. That's telling the message handler that this is going to be a file. And then that's what calls send file, and on the other end, receive file.
It has to be added as a key value pair inside reply.attributes.
Yeah, it has to have that file attribute, okay? And normally the value would be the file name.
This is the relative path, right?
Okay. This is a native class. Yep.
It internally invokes the functionality which will send the file into the send file.
Yeah, what happens is if you look at, what happens is if you look at the send file code, if it sees that file attribute, it does the sender does message inspecting. That send thread is inspecting the message to see where it goes, and it's also looking for that file attribute. And if it sees that file attribute, then it calls send file. And send file starts sending the message chunks. Now, the intent of my design was that on the other end, the messages are coming through with chunks, but the receive thread doesn't put those messages in the queue until it's got all the chunks written into the file and closed the file. Somebody told me in the class, in the 8 o'clock class this morning, that isn't what's happening, that every one of those messages are coming out in the message queue. If so, that's a bug that I need to fix, but it doesn't affect anything you do. All it means is you get some extraneous noise, coming out of those messages, which you can ignore. Okay.
Main intention is that the receiver should get the entire message only once when the file is completely.
Yes, that's the intent. The receiver gets he only gets it after the file has been totally written, and that means. So imagine that here you are, you're wanting to pop up that code view. Okay. You don't want to react. You don't want to react to that until the file's all there. You don't want to start when it's so. So when you get that file message, you know that it's all there. And now what you've done, you have a server proc and a client proc, and on the client proc, what you're doing is when you get that message, then you pop up the code. So that proc would know the file is there, know it's in saved files, and it goes and reads it out as a string. That's the model. All right. Any other questions?
So based on this, on the client side, when I'll receive the file name as well as the file contents in the form of entire string, I will have to display.
That's what I did there. I'm not telling you what your design should be. Okay. Well, this is a yes. This is possible. Here's one way. One other thing, a student asked me, can I send the file and an attribute? I forgot whether maybe I said this at the beginning of class, but just in case I didn't, I'll say it again. Can I send the file as an attribute? My answer is yes, but a file has a whole bunch of line feeds. Message attributes are terminated by line feeds. So if you just dump, you put file text as a attribute, as a key, and all of that file text as the value of that key, the message handler will interpret each one of those lines as a separate attribute, and it'll get totally confused. Totally confused. So I know that for a fact because I forgot it and I did it that way, and I got a whole bunch of junk, bad message, bad message, bad message, bad message. It's telling me that there was no colon, I didn't have a value. So that means that if you want to send it as an attribute, you can, but you've got to change it from the ASCII text form. You can hex encode it, or you can base 64 encode it. None of those have new line spaces. They have a character for the new line, but they don't have new line spaces. And you can figure out how to do the hex conversion. If you want to do base 64 conversion, you'll find in a 687 code, there's a base 64 project that shows you how to do it, which, I stole the design from somebody else. I hope I gave him attribution, where it came from. I think using what I would do is I would use the mechanism that's all built into the COM system already. It's expecting you to use send files and save files. And again, your options are to use them, copy a file in the send file, and then take the message with the attribute, and post the message, and it'll happen the way you expect. Or you could make a new function for the COM that accepted a file path, not just a file name, but a file path. Okay. And then you do basically the same thing that my send file does, except that now you're not reading out of the send file folder. You're reading from whatever path you handed the function. That'll work fine. Or you could change COM so that you could reset the send saved and send file folders. I probably wouldn't do that. I probably would create a function that would allow me to pass in a path, so I don't have to do that extra copy from the repository folder into the send file folder. Any other questions before we break? Yes.
Can you explain the steps from the steps sheet? Point 3, D point.
Which one are you? Give me the number.
Point 3, D
Point 3. So add server prop. So extract the name of it. So in comes this message, and you got to extract the name of the file and the relative path from the request message. And that's I've shown you, I've done that, but you can use your own design. You just have to design the message so that you can put any kind of attributes, any kind of however you want. That's your design. But the message has to tell him the file that he wants and the relative path. It's just, you're not giving him a physical path in the repository. You're just saying, I'm in test 1 dir, storage test 1 or whatever. And then you build a reply message that has file attribute to trigger. That was what triggers the send thread called the send file message. So.
The trigger operation is already there in the.
Already there.
So we do not have to. And the send files folder. Do the name of the folder should be the same characters, or it can be any folder? How does
That's what I was just explaining. The way the COM is designed, it will send from send file and send to save files. Period. Okay. Now, if you want to do something different, then you have to write a function that will move those directories around, which probably is more complicated than you need to. Or you would write a function that instead of saying send file, instead of saying just the file name, now you give it the fully qualified file name to the path where it is in the registry, so you don't have to copy it. You can write it the same way I wrote the send file function, but it's now send file qualified path or something like that, And and you give it a fully qualified path. So now you can send it from any folder. It'll still go to saved folders,